Hi, everyone. We'll get started in just a minute. We're going to let a few more people get logged in and settled. Welcome, everyone, and thank you for joining us on the 2021 National Adoption Month webinar, Every Conversation Matters. This webinar is presented by Adopt US Kids and Child Welfare Information Gateway on behalf of the U.S. Children's Bureau. My name is Kate Hurt. I'm the Senior Director of Capacity Building and Engagement at Adopt US Kids. So just a few quick mentions before we get started. This webinar will be recorded and all resources will be available on our Adopt US Kids website or on the Child Welfare Information Gateway site. If you have a question or comment, please send that through Q&A or chat, but please make sure that if you want everyone to see your chat, that you change the recipients in the To drop-down menu from hosts and panelists to everyone. We will have an opportunity at the end for you to ask today's presenters questions. So please feel free to send those through Q&A or chat as we go along or during the live panel discussion. And lastly, we hope that you will take a few moments after the webinar to give us feedback. You will receive a survey shortly after the end of the webinar. And with that, it is my honor to introduce June Dorn, National Adoption Specialist with the Children's Bureau.
Thank you, Kate. I want to extend a warm welcome from the Children's Bureau to everyone attending today. I want to thank you for taking time out of your busy lives to join us, and I trust that what you hear in the webinar today, the voices of youth, will have an impact on how you engage youth in your daily lives. Our theme continues to be about the importance of engaging youth, and this year with a special title theme of Every Conversation Matters. I want to thank the Child Welfare Information Gateway and the Adopt US Kids teams for developing and hosting this webinar. This wouldn't be here and occurring today without a lot of hard work from both of those organizations in this effort. And I'd also like to note and just announce that we will be having our 2021 National Adoption Month event held virtually this year, but it will be webcast from the Great Hall in the Humphrey Building here in Washington, D.C. on November 9th. We will begin at noon Eastern Time. And I encourage all of you to keep an eye out for a notice of that should be coming out very soon. And with that, again, thank you for joining us today. And I would like to introduce and turn this over to Erin Bader with the Child Welfare Information Gateway. She is our adoption lead for them.
Thank you, June. So as we get started with today's event, I wanted to provide a little background on our National Adoption Month 2021 theme and our website and review our objectives for today's webinar. Each year, we focus our NAM outreach and awareness raising efforts around a new adoption-related theme to help support professionals working each day to find permanency for children and youth in foster care. As June said, this year's National Adoption Month theme is Every Conversation Matters. Incorporating youth engagement into daily child welfare practice can start with a simple conversation. Listen to what the young person has to say, what their goals are, and how they feel about adoption. Create an environment where they can be honest and ask questions. Youth are the experts of their own lives, so partner with them in permanency planning and allow them to make decisions. On today's webinar, we will share insights on how to successfully engage and partner with youth and emphasize the importance and value of engaging youth in permanency planning. Next slide, please. But before we get into today's webinar, I wanted to briefly highlight a few key sections of the National Adoption Month 2021 website. The resources you will find on the website will support your youth engagement efforts. Please pay special attention to these three sections that I've highlighted on this slide. And when you get your copy of the PowerPoint, you'll be able to click on the links. So for the Child Welfare Professionals section, this page provides an outline for how to honor and incorporate youth voice into efforts to achieve adoption for teens in foster care. And this section was kind of co-produced with a young adult who was adopted from foster care. The next page I wanted to highlight is the Youth Engagement Practice Examples, where you can find resources developed by Children's Bureau adoption grantees related to building relationship with teens, understanding the impact of trauma, separation, and loss, and preparing teens and adoptive families for permanency. Lastly, the Spread the Word section provides graphics, social media posts, and email signatures to help us increase awareness about the need for adoptive families and show your support for National Adoption Month. Next slide, please. So up next is a video from one of our featured guests on the National Adoption Month 2020 celebration event. And we are excited to welcome her here today to our 2021 NAM webinar. Catherine Monet is from Maryland and is an active member of the Adopt US Kids Speakers Bureau. Let's hear her story in her own words.
Hi everyone, my name is Catherine Monet and I'm so excited to be here to help present at National Adoption Month on our topic, Every Conversation Matters. A little bit about me is I am a Maryland native and I spent 8 years in the foster care system before being adopted by my long-term foster family at age 20. Now I know when we hear the age 20, it's like, wow, it's a little bit steep, but here's the story. So before attending a leadership conference, all this time I thought that my permanency plan was just one thing. There was never really any options put in front of me that I could kind of, learn about and make a decision for myself. So it wasn't until I attended a leadership conference where I met so many amazing youth and young adults who were adopted, in the process of being adopted, and many adopted at the age of 21, 22, 23. Upon learning that, it was kind of upsetting because all this time I thought, adoption was mainly reserved for those who were younger, babies, young children, like 5, 6 years old. I mean, who wants a teenager? And that was just, my thought process this whole entire time, especially when sitting through permanency plan meetings, Let me just go with what's being put in front of me. And it wasn't until I sat at that conference, and I learned so much and met so many amazing people and gained so many resources that I took with me in my back pocket. And that's when I made the decision. You know, I've been with my family for such a long time, and this was never an option brought up to us, but this is an option that I want to present at the table. And my voice matters. I'm so glad to be here today to present on why every conversation matters. When I came back from the leadership conference, upon learning all this stuff about, you know, older teens can be adopted. It is a possible thing. It is not rare as many may think. I came back with, you know, one of my social workers and decided to present this in front of my long-term foster family. You know, I've always felt like this is where I belonged. I always felt like this is something that this is what I wanted. This was my home. But now I was ready for something that was more formal. And so with the help of one of my social workers from my agency, I sat down with my foster care family and we all agreed, okay, let's go forward with this idea. And ever since then, we never turned back. And I was adopted at the age of 20 as a result of this. Now that's just my story. And I know that there are so many teenagers that are in the same situation that may have one permanency plan without many options. And that's why it's important that so many professionals who are listening to this right now understand it is very imperative to include youth in the decision making. Because at the end of the day, these are the lives that are going to be impacted the most. These are the lives who are going to be implicated by the decisions that are made at this table, that are stamped in black and white. So why not? So many youth may not know that adoption is a possibility because that's not an option that's put at the table. I know personally speaking, that was not an option that was put in front of me. Professionals involved in permanency plans should definitely acknowledge the concerns of youth head on. It's important for youth to be involved in the creating and establishing process when it comes to something that's going to impact their lives, perhaps for the rest of their lives. Being adopted has had so many positive implications on my life, not just in legal form, but also feeling belonged. Feeling like this is no longer a temporary home that, you know, I would just pass through, or when I'm just in town or coming home from school or Thanksgiving that I have to wonder, where am I going to go? But a place where I can call my own. Family members that I have learned to love, and they loved me and accepted me. And that's why it's so important that the permanency options are presented in front of youth so that they may be able to experience what true stability feels like, what feeling belonged feels like. But without that, we need the help of professionals. We need your help. We need you to include us at that table. You know, at the end of the day, it's not about the cards that are dealt to us, but it's how we play them. And I can tell you, after that conference, I learned who I wanted at that table. I knew the outcome that I wanted to see in my life. And that was adoption. And that was having a voice at the table and adding those people that will help support me. And that's why every conversation matters. Without those conversations at the table, I would not be able to defy statistics that is one of the greatest accomplishments of my life. I was able to graduate from a 4-year university, a university that I never thought that I would get into. But with that support, I was able to do that. Move to Los Angeles and establish a life for myself. Something that I never thought I would be able to do. Only just dream or just notebook. Be able to experience the things that I've been able to experience, whether the good or the bad, but having that support system with me. And it's all because of those conversations. So I'm just hoping for anyone listening, whether you're a caseworker, attorney involved in a case, a foster parent, a potential foster parent, someone looking to adopt a teenager, any of those cases, I just hope that you just understand that those voices matter, and we hope that you listen to us.
Wow, that's so inspiring. Thank you, Catherine, for sharing your story. Next slide, please.
Hi, everyone.
I would now like to hand it over to Kimberly Bonham, Supervisor of the Foster Family and Adoption Services Team in Arlington County, and an alumni of the Adopt US Kids Minority Professional Leadership Development Program. If you have questions for Kim as she's speaking, please enter them in the Q&A and we can address them during the panel. Thank you, Kim, for being with us today.
Absolutely. Thank you, Erin. I'm honored to join you today in celebration of National Adoption Month to discuss permanency and youth engagement. I've been working in child welfare in Arlington County Child and Family Services for 19 years, where we're located in one of 133 counties in Virginia that are state supervised and locally administered. We're a small public child welfare agency where today we have less than 65 children and youth in foster care. I've held several positions during my time. I've been a foster care worker, adoption worker, foster parent trainer, and now a supervisor for a team responsible for foster parent recruitment, traditional foster parent and kinship training, and pre and post adoption services. As a new foster care worker at the beginning of my child welfare career, I can recall working with teens and having conversations about their goal of adoption. I remember the many youth who said no to adoption, who left care without permanency. It was a mistake to not have more conversations to help them make an informed decision about their permanency goal and options. We need to hear their voices. We need to know what is important to them because permanency is about their lives and about their futures. Youth engagement and how we engage with youth is a crucial part of pursuing permanency. Next slide. A few years ago, I had the opportunity to be a part of a growing number of minority professionals to apply to be a fellow in the Minority Professional Leadership Development Program, MPLD. It's a program led by Spalding for Children and administered by the National Adoption Association, Adopt US Kids, and funded through the Children's Bureau. When I applied to be an MPLD fellow, I was in my 6th year as a supervisor with a team of committed, competent adoption workers. However, one area of concern was our permanency outcomes for youth ages 13 to 17 with the goal of adoption. We were finding that although the youth who could not safely return home or be with their kin, they were with a foster family who wanted to adopt them, or they were matched with an adoptive family who wanted to adopt them, but they were not moving forward with adoption. The youth would not provide consent to their adoptions. It's a unique challenge of practice as youth at these ages may not be neurologically able to make such a huge decision by themselves, but they also need the resources to make the educated choices for themselves. In these situations, their cases would be transferred back to a foster care team, and they would receive foster care services until they left care at ages 18 or 21. In other situations, their goal was adoption, but they never were referred to my team. It appeared that the teens did not consent to be adopted, so termination of parental rights didn't take place, and therefore they were never referred to the adoption team. The youth who leave care without permanency are disproportionately children of color. That is true in my small agency and nationally. There was an event at my agency that was especially impactful to me, and it spearheaded the reason for my involvement in MPLD and the desire to explore different ways to engage with youth about their permanency goal of adoption. I attended a birthday party at my agency for an African-American youth who was turning 21 and leaving foster care. His wonderful foster care worker had prepared this event at our office to celebrate his milestone birthday and officially close his case out with our division. He was moving into adult services, and his new adult services worker was one of the many of us sitting around the conference room table. His worker invited other workers at the agency who were still there who knew him. He had been in care for 14 years. He once had a worker on my team and a goal of adoption. After several years, he made the decision to not be adopted. Seeing him sitting around that table with several workers that I assumed he didn't remember, as we all took turns to wish him a happy birthday, was painful to me. We were not his family. We were not his foster or adoptive family. And as much as we love our kids, we were not meant to take the place of family for him. When it was my turn to speak, I said as much as I could without breaking down, and then I quickly left the room. I went to the bathroom, doubled over in tears, with the stark realization that we had failed him. My division leader, who was also in the room, followed me to the bathroom and said that she understood why I was so upset and told me to use everything I was feeling in that moment to determine what we could do to address the issue of our youth leaving care without permanency. So when the opportunity came to apply to be an MPLD fellow, I wanted to use that opportunity to review the reasons why youth are ambivalent and explore ways to address youth preparation and readiness, essentially youth engagement. As an MPLD fellow, I learned I would be responsible for an action research project to address and identify the issue that I identified on my team. And so I participated in monthly meetings, webinars with leading experts in the field, and completed required readings, to name a few of the activities. Next slide, please. So to begin, I had to develop a PICO question, which was the population or problem, intervention, comparisons, outcome question. From the work in the field, I recognized the power of peer groups. So I really wondered if teens with the current or former goal of adoption could provide us some information regarding the reasons for their ambivalence, their perceptions about adoption, and their lack of readiness for their permanency goal. And if I could use this information to develop group sessions to address the issues that may be contributing to their ambivalence. Next slide, please. So it's helpful to have a picture of who was in foster care in Arlington, Virginia at the time of my project. There were 80 youth in care in Arlington County in July of 2019. 16 out of the 80 children in care had a goal of adoption. 6 of those were teens with a goal of adoption. 15 of the 80 youth were ages 18 to 21, and they were receiving independent living services. Of those 80 youth, 19 youth in foster care were ages 13 to 17. The race and ethnicity of the youth in care included 35% African American, 39% Latinx, 19% white, 5% Asian. Next slide, please. So this slide includes the racial and ethnicity of the youth with the goal of adoption. One youth was undocumented. She was in agreement with her goal of adoption. However, we were unable at the time to offer adoption assistance to the family interested in adopting her. Adoption assistance is only available to children and youth who are US citizens or permanent residents. So for cases like this one, even if the family can legally adopt and the youth is ready, they were unable to receive the funding and services to address the youth's special needs. Next slide, please. So this next slide breaks down the youth that we wanted to hear from to inform us about their reasons for ambivalence, perception, and lack of readiness or readiness for their permanency goal of adoption. 5 of the 15 youth at the time were receiving independent living services, and they had previously had a goal of adoption. 4 of the 7 youth receiving permanent foster care services had previously had a goal of adoption. 5 of the 9 youth receiving independent living and permanent foster care were African American. Of the 28 youth that were receiving independent living services or had the goal of permanent foster care or adoption, 6 of them at the time were undocumented. Next slide, please. So the 15 youth selected were part of a convenience sample, and they all at one time had the goal of adoption. The youth were all either still in care or they were former youth in care where their worker had access to reaching them. So we really relied on their relationship with their worker, one of the best tools of engagement for this task, to explain the reasons for the interview. The workers were provided talking points. All but one of the youth were in a family setting, foster or adopted, or living independently. One youth was involved in the juvenile justice system at the time of the interview. Next slide. So we asked questions in 5 topic areas, and the questions were slightly different if the youth was moving forward to be adopted. Adult support questions included things like, who would you call to ask for advice? Who would you call at 2 a.m. if you were in trouble? Adoption perception questions were questions like, how do you think being adopted is different from being in foster care? Permanence questions included, what does the word permanency mean to you? And adoption concern questions. We asked some youth who changed their minds, if we asked them, what made you change your mind? We also asked, what concerns did you have about adoption? And birth family loyalty and identity questions were really captured through all the other responses. Next slide, please. So the interviews took place over 2 months and 10 youth participated. We did offer the youth who participated a gift card for their participation. Next slide. So our approach was one of one-on-one communication. Social workers conducted the interviews. They maximized participation and engagement by allowing the youth to decide if they wanted to meet in person or by phone. The youth who participated were 6 youth who were Latinx, 3 African American, 1 white, 3 males, 7 females, and their age range was from age 15 to 20. The participants have been in foster care between the time period of 2 to 8 years when the interviews were conducted, so an average of 49 months. Next slide, please. So the categories of the youth included current youth in foster care who did not consent to be adopted, current youth in foster care who consented to be adopted and matched with an adoptive family, current youth in foster care with a goal of adoption not matched with an adoptive family, and former youth in foster care who did not consent to be adopted. Next slide, please. So for adult support, 20% did not consent to be adopted, who did not consent to be adopted, could not identify an adult support. It should be noted that those who mentioned their DHS worker as their main person of support were excluded from this number. Next slide. So 10% who did not consent to adoption and 4 who did consent did not have any negative association with adoption or stated that they knew someone who was adopted. Next slide. So 10% who did not consent to be adopted had a good understanding of what permanency was. And you can see there those who did not have a good understanding of permanence. Next slide. So 50% stated that they had unanswered questions or concerns about adoption. And this included one youth who was moving forward to be adopted. Next slide. So youth, they had ambivalence and concerns about adoption due to birth family connections. In 40% of the youth who did not consent to be adopted, this was a topic of concern. Next slide. So the overall implications were that many of the youth saw adoption as taking away something from them. For example, their worker or their birth family. Diligent efforts must be made to approach adults known to teens to perhaps adopt them. Virginia law states that a youth age 14 or older can object to termination of parental rights. In a case where return home is not possible, and we have diligently searched for relatives, but they're not available for the goal of relative placement, we do look for adoption as a next possible option. However, if the youth is age 14 years old and objects to their termination of parental rights, then the goal of adoption cannot be achieved. And permanent foster care is the only possible goal until once they turn 16 years old. And so what we noticed is that there were a lot of youth who, during that time period of between the ages of 14 and 16, they could have a goal of adoption, but we were not moving forward with that goal of adoption because they did not consent. And then, of course, I know you see with kinship care, I'm sure you're looking at that last point and saying, well, of course. But however, in my experience, the family member that said no early on for various reasons, divided loyalties, concerns that the parent won't approve, they may be willing to be that option for a youth when the permanency goal has changed. Next slide. And so prior to the Family First Act, which we all know is transforming child welfare significantly, the policies noted here echoed what we know best, and that is that children and youth do best with a family. Each of the policies and studies leans hard into children being with family, having contact and connection with their family, and the importance of kinship care. All are grounded and impacted by youth engagement. Next slide. So once all the results were in from the youth interviews, it was time to design the group. The Center for Adoption, Support, and Education, CASE, currently has a contract in Virginia with the Virginia Department of Social Services to conduct post-adoption case management. And so as adoption professionals, we attended several trainings with CASE, understood and respected their expertise. And so I reached out to them to determine if they could hear about the interview outcomes and support the creation and facilitation of the group. CASE thankfully agreed. Next slide. So the group was designed with group goals and objectives that are grounded in youth voice and choice. We designed a 3-hour, 3-session group that was interactive and included opportunities to address the topic areas of adult support, birth family loyalty and identity, adoption perceptions, permanence questions, and overall adoption concerns. Prior to the COVID-19 pandemic, the group was supposed to be in person, and we had a lot of challenges with the referrals. There were a lot of concerns about logistical things like getting their youth back and forth to the group each week. Making the group virtual supported referrals that we could receive throughout the state. As I mentioned, with our agency being so small, it was really important to partner with other agencies to ensure that we would have a viable group. Next slide. And so the first session really focused on activities that focused on how the peers are alike and different, and offered questions or opportunities for them to ask questions about adoption and permanence, opportunities for sharing their artwork created in the group. Next slide. The second group focused on identity activities and questions for the adults and prospective adoptive parents in their lives. I attended the group as well so that I could be available to answer questions specifically about the child welfare, about the court process. Next slide. And then the final group, it really engaged a panel of youth who were formerly in foster care and were adults that could share about their experience of choosing adoption as their permanency option. And it also included a youth who did not. From the surveys that we completed after the group session was over, this was one of the most popular sessions of the group. Next slide. These are examples of the actual flyer for the group and the referral form. The name of the group is Adoption or Nah, and the name was developed with a young person's input. We tried to make the flyer as user-friendly as possible, the referral as user-friendly as possible to encourage workers who we know are so busy to complete the referral form for their youth. Next slide. So the group was truly a work of art, inspired by the youth that I discussed at the beginning of my presentation. We had several failed in-person group attempts, but it wasn't until we were able to make the group virtual that we were actually able to launch it in February of this year. The group attendees included 63% of the youth that attended were youth of color between the ages of 13 and 17. I found that administrative follow-up was really the key to ensuring this group was going to take place. It was necessary to ensure that the groups were aware of the group start date, end date, expectations for attending, because each group built upon each other. The attendees could not miss a session. Ensuring the group members had access to a computer and a private space to participate required really speaking to their worker and to their foster parents, or their, if they happened to be in a residential setting, communicating with the residential staff that would be available when the youth was participating. The day of the actual group, extra reach out was necessary to ensure the attendees were aware of the start time and had everything to log in. The incentive for participation was clearly defined. Again, gift cards were made available to all the youth who attended and finished the sessions. Next slide. As the slide indicates, each youth was provided a pre and post group survey through SurveyMonkey with 8 Likert scale questions. Trends from the pre and post survey indicate that, as the slide states, that the youth gained a better understanding of what permanency means. They recognized the importance of committed adults in their lives. They learned that adoption can add supportive people to their lives, not take away. Understood that their birth family could remain in their lives after adoption. Learned how having an adoptive family can support safe independence. Next slide. The post survey included a comment section for the participants to provide feedback about the group and their experience in it. The following are some of the responses from the youth who filled in the comment boxes. I won't read those. I'll let you all read those for yourselves. But the group was very successful. One of the things that that I think I recognized after the group was how much the attendees needed each other to recognize that they had a lot of commonality when it came to their fears about adoption. What I've also discovered since we've finished the group, I've done some follow-up with the referring workers and have determined that 5 out of the 6 youth who finished the group have all decided to consent to their adoption. And in fact, one youth, her adoption is now finalized, and another one is well on the way. I did check yesterday to determine some of the outcomes. And so with those outcomes, I really do consider that to be successful. Next slide. And so lessons learned specifically for my agency and about the group is anticipate the need for different approaches to engage youth. Broadly know that administrative practices and policies can unknowingly collide with best practice for youth and care. Be aware of policy changes and talk to your agency leadership about anticipated issues and develop internal protocols to address it. Involvement and buy-in is needed by all staff and the leadership team in order to effectively change agency practice. Making sure everyone is aware of why the change is needed, to get input, share data about the number of youth leaving care without permanence, for example. And then knowing that legal status can impact permanency outcome for older youth, doing what you can to determine loopholes. Agencies should try, like we did in our agency, to obtain the special immigrant juvenile status as soon as possible for our undocumented youth to prevent delays in adoption. The youth that I mentioned earlier in my presentation, who we could not offer adoption assistance to the family who wanted to adopt her, had been in care for 5 years. And we worked with our state officials, and there was actually a loophole, and discovered that the youth's 5 years as in foster care counted as residency, and we were able to offer the family adoption assistance, and she's now adopted. Next slide. And so concrete strategies for youth engagement: practice good self-care. You must take care of yourself in order to take care of others. Listen to them. Involve youth in all aspects of their permanency planning. Ensure that they are at the table. Build trust. Advocate for them. Show up for them, even when they're not at their best. And explore tools and resources. Be willing to try new tools, like the group. Use the Child Welfare Information Gateway. There's some great articles and tips on youth engagement. Acknowledge and address racial disproportionality and disparities, using a racial equity lens to review practice at your agency that may not be contributing to good permanency outcomes for youth and youth engagement. Use data to inform practice changes. Consider where you should be collecting data to support changes, like the youth group. Anything that needs funding to make it happen usually needs some data, needs some numbers to confirm that it's needed. And so I believe that's the end of my slides. And so thank you. And I look forward to your questions during the panel.
Thank you, Kim. I would echo, there's a lot of positive feedback happening in the chat. I think I would echo what maybe others are feeling, of just feeling inspired by this project that you have created, and kind of hope that we can continue to provide young people the opportunity to connect with each other and have a safe space to get their questions and concerns answered and addressed. Next slide, please. So and it's there. I would now like to introduce Tawana to share her story. Tawana is a freshman at Seton Hall University in New Jersey and an advocate for using her voice to change the narrative around adoption and foster care. She has joined the Adopt US Kids Speakers Bureau this year. Let's hear it in her own words.
Hi everyone, my name is Tawana Brown and I'm 18 years old from Northern New Jersey. I was adopted when I was 15 years old in 2018. Today I'm going to talk to you a little bit about why every conversation matters and why it was very important to me. When I reflect upon my time that I spent inside the foster care system and the time after, I really reflect on my relationship that I have with my CASA worker. My CASA worker in particular was somebody that really stood out as one of my biggest supporters and somebody that really cherished the relationship that she formed with myself. When I think of a conversation that really changed the trajectory of my life and what I saw for myself, was when we sat down and had a conversation back when I was 13 years old actually, and we went to our local diner called Chit Chat Diner, and I met up with her. And the purpose of that meeting essentially was just to talk about an event that she was hosting, because she wanted me to speak at that CASA's gala. And in that conversation, we started to talk a little bit more about what stability looked like and what stability really meant, and the idea of permanency. This is when we were able to have a transparent conversation about my options as a foster youth and what I saw for myself and how I could explore options that would give me so much more meaning to life, and something that I could hold on to and have forever. And out of that came the idea of a forever home and what that would look like for myself. She really allowed me to be expressive and what I wanted, and gave me the space to not only express my feelings, but talk about how that would impact my life currently and thereafter. And from that, we were able to have a conversation with not only myself, but my siblings, my social workers, the judge proceeding the case, as well as my family, to open the door for that option, and not just unification in the sense of like we were going to go back to our parents, but the idea of that we had the choice to, you know, make a decision of what we wanted for ourselves and what we wanted for our future. So in that, I was adopted by my grandmother in 2018, and that has been a great blessing of mine and something that I truly cherish. And my CASA worker has been somebody that I give a lot of credit to for even allowing that to happen, because without her, I would say that the conversation of adoption might not have ever come up. And it was in her that she was able to sit down and talk to a little 13-year-old and allow me the space to say, like, hey, your voice matters. I believe in you, and you have the power and the potential to be whatever you want to be in the future, and to not limit myself. So I give her a lot of credit for that, and I absolutely adore her for that. And now when I reflect on a lot of my successes, I give her a lot of credit as well. Currently, I am in college. I am starting my first year at Seton Hall University as an Africana Studies major, which is very exciting and something that I'm very proud of. In addition to that, I have been continuing my advocacy work when it comes to children in the foster care system, when it comes to adoption, and when it comes to social justice work and things like that. I have been building my network and just building relationships with different people from different walks of life and really nurturing that. And I'm really proud of that, and I was glad that I'm able to speak to you all today.
Okay, thank you, Tawana. So now we are at the point in the webinar that seems to be the favorite part for most people, which is the opportunity to hear directly from these young people and our professional about why every conversation matters. So I'd like to welcome Catherine Monet, Tawana Brown, and Kimberly Bonham to our panel discussion. Awesome. So we've been watching the chat and Q&A to field questions for our panel, but please continue to send questions in and we'll get to as many as we can. So the first question, we talk a lot about how important trust is for successful youth engagement. So our first question is, what can workers do to help build trust with their youth? Catherine, do you want to get us started today?
Sure. Hi, everyone. So excited to be here. To answer your question about how to get workers to build trust with their youth, just simply, first and foremost, just making sure that you don't have the mindset that it's just, a 9-to-5 job, because while this may just be 9 to 5, and of course, work-life balance is, our circumstances and everything are not 9 to 5. So just ensuring that you are there and present in the moment to hear your the youth's voice and hear what their concerns are and things that they want to move on, and involve them in things that are guided around them. There are many times where you don't know what's going on in their plan or know what the next steps will be or what's going on other than what they see in black and white. So it's important to kind of speak to them where they understand and where they want to help create that change within their lives.
And thank you so much, Catherine. Tawana, what would you say to that question, how you build trust?
Hi, everyone. I'm so excited to be able to speak to you all today. For that question, I would definitely say for social workers and professionals that are working with youth in care or have been in care, to be transparent, proactive, and very open and accepting to the fact that they have to meet the youth where they are. A lot of the times that gets lost, and that may just be because of the other work that they may be doing. But when you're dealing with children, especially children that have been through so much, it's important that you dedicate your time to them and let them know that they are worthy and deserving of having a voice, and that you're going to be an active support for them.
Perfect. Thank you so much for that insight. So the next question we have is for Kim. This question, it's a question I think we all want to know answers to, which is, what barriers did you identify to the youth wanting to engage in their own permanency, and what strategies did you use to overcome them?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think that the youth had so many unanswered questions about why they were in foster care in the first place. Not knowing everything about their story was definitely a barrier. Misunderstandings about permanency options for them. A lot of young people, of course, may talk to, they talk to each other, of course, and hear things like, you can get your own apartment, you can live on your own. And of course, we have some youth who are ready for that, but many others who are younger and just aren't ready. And having that misunderstanding that adoption would not lend itself to them eventually having something like that. Not understanding the fact that there are people out there that want to adopt older youth. I heard Catherine, heard you say that when you were speaking, but knowing that older youth adoption happens, and then also just the workers having a good understanding of the youth brain and understanding brain development, needing to ensure that they have a good understanding about how young people make decisions, and sometimes they're going to make some mistakes, but that we still have to be there for them, advocate for them, help them work through those really tough decisions that they have to make, being a young person, being a teenager. Strategies, being authentic. I think that's probably one of the best strategies is being authentic with youth. Really making sure that they're actively involved in their permanency plan, that even if they resist coming to that meeting or talking, to encourage them to do so and to be patient with them while they're maybe resisting being involved, and to just listen. Take the time to listen to them, create the right environment to have those kinds of conversations and to listen to them. So.
That's such a great answer. I feel like we're going to have a lot of requests to connect people to you after this webinar. And we're happy to do that. If you want to get connected to any of our panelists, just please put that request in the chat and we will make that connection for you. So this next question, I really like. It's a longer one. I'm just going to read it how this person wrote it. I don't want to misinterpret with any sort of paraphrase. So the question, I believe, is directed toward our youth. Can you please talk about how to inspire youth who are losing hope on finding a family? I work with a lot of older youth in foster care who have been waiting for a family for a long time. They eventually begin to lose hope and don't want to continue to participate in recruitment events or even conversations about what they want in a family. Adoption becomes a trigger word after years of rejection. How do we help them keep the hope so we can continue to work to find them a family? That is a very heavy question, but a very important question. Tawana, do you want to give that a go?
Yeah, so that's a lot to unpack there. My initial response to that would be to continue to be that support for that youth. I know a lot of the times the youth may be resistant because of a past full of rejection and so many unknowns and uncertainties, but being persistent and consistent and an active role and member in that youth's life really makes a difference, because when the student is ready, the teacher shows up. And that essentially means that when that child sees that you're constantly, engaging in conversations and keeping them involved and just letting them know that there is a forever home for them, and really talking about that adoption does not mean that you can't be adopted after you turn a certain age. There are plenty of people that were in care that got adopted at the age of like 25. And that's real things that happen in real life. And sometimes it's not often talked about and it's not brought to light. So just continue to be an active member in that youth's life and continue to let them know that they're worthy and deserving of a forever home and that their forever home is waiting for them. And I think that that youth would be more receptive of, doing different engagements. And maybe they don't want to attend so many recruitment events. Maybe switch up the events or the engagements that you're presenting to them. I know for me, what was very impactful was when I was able to see youth in power positions, and I was able to hear from youth's voice that, there is light at the end of the tunnel and there is purpose and there is a future for us. Oftentimes we get tired of hearing from adults. We want to be able to speak to someone and to hear someone that can relate to us on a younger person's level. So you have to meet them where they are. If you know anybody else, youth-wise that is like around the same age range, maybe try to get them connected and set them up where they could go out for lunch or the movies and let that relationship flourish on its own. And then that could be a great support as well to continue to foster and nurture those feelings and continue to share the message of your forever home is waiting for you.
I love that answer. And it makes me think of all our conversations about it's not a one size fits all. Sometimes you really got to get creative and shake it up and try something new. Catherine, do you have anything to add to that?
I literally loved Tawana's answer. That was exactly what I was thinking, especially with getting youth connected with other youth. Because I know for me, the the whole adoption conversation and the idea of sparking it did not come to me until I attended a leadership conference that my mentor and caseworker connected me to, where I was able to meet so many youth that were my age or even older who had been adoption. And me in that situation, I didn't know anything about teenagers and young adults getting adopted. So before I even attended that conference, I was totally kind of out of my element as far as, just listening to the same thing one of my caseworkers was telling me, permanency, independent living, all this other stuff. But I wasn't hearing anything that's just something forever. It's just, just passing through windows and rooms and not having a permanent home. And so it wasn't until I attended that conference where I was able to learn so many valuable, inspirational stories that kind of sparked something within me that wanted to pursue that conversation and go back home and have those conversations with my family and my caseworker, with everyone involved in my case. So definitely having youth attend these conferences where they can build leadership and also be a part of those conversations at the table, because though they may be sitting at the table, are they really sitting at the table? Is the question that a lot of caseworkers have to ask, and just bringing them into that element will definitely spark some inspiration and hope in them.
Very important point. Thank you so much, Catherine. So our next question, also for our youth, don't feel bad, Kim, they usually steal the spotlight on these things. How do you address a teen who is refusing to consider being adopted, even if their foster family wants to adopt, due to the teen's sense of loyalty towards their birth family? We want to respect their wishes. However, the state pushes for permanency if we have a permanent custody of the child. Catherine, you want to go ahead and piggyback on that? I know you just spoke.
Sure. That's a great question. And I think that goes back to listening to, at the end of the day, listening to what the youth wants and respecting their opinion and seeing where you can meet them where they are as far as, future plans and everything. At the end of the day, if that's not something that they want, I personally wouldn't continue to push it so strictly. But also finding other ways where they can still have that connection with their foster family and, their birth family, like having a balance, but definitely, not being too pushy on what should happen in your eyes.
Thank you. Tawana, what would you say to that? How to, address kids that are feeling that strong sense of loyalty towards their birth family and might think adoption is a betrayal?
To add on to what Catherine was saying, I would say to engage in a conversation where the youth is aware that their birth family can still be very involved and present in active roles in their life, even after being adopted. A lot of the times people have this notion that adoption is the end all be all and you're moving on with your new family, but that is so far from the truth. And adoption can be what you make it, with your new forever home as well as the home that you previously came from. And that could get a little sticky depending on the types of situations, but having that open conversation about unification and what that may look like if the birth parents were still receptive of being in that child's life, and then the child really wants that, that's something that you definitely have to listen to, because the worst thing that you could do to any youth is ignore their feelings and to force something on them that they don't want. And a lot of the times I feel like youth may be scared of adoption and afraid to proceed with that because they do have that sense of comfort and that sense of home because they were raised in a different environment with other people. So it's important to continue to nurture those feelings and continue to create an open and safe space where the youth know that they can come to their foster parents, their social workers, and anybody else that may be involved, and they're able to engage in an honest conversation and receive honest and helpful feedback. And a lot of the times that feedback doesn't necessarily have to be words. There is power in just listening and just being silent. A lot of the times youth just want to vent. And I think that's also a very important note to
spread that message, because sometimes we get lost in like, how do I respond to this, or what type of response should I give the youth? And sometimes they just may need a head of an acknowledgement. And I think that goes along the terms of understanding the youth's love language. And I'm very big on that. I am somebody that I am recognized by words of affirmation and a lot of hugs. I love hugs. So just engaging in those different types of things, doing different building activities and things like that to learn what the child likes and what the child doesn't like. And love language is very important no matter who you are. If you're involved in anybody's life, whether that's youth, whether that's elders, whatever age range, you have to be able to reciprocate that type of communication and that type of relationship, and really show the youth that love and unconditional support and family is really a community of people. It's not just limited in that sense.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Tawana. I think we have Erin. Erin is my colleague, and we're kind of tag teaming these comments. Do you have a couple that have come in?
I do. Okay. So I think, well, this first one I have is for Catherine and Tawana. And the question is, did you receive any sort of adoption preparation services when you were considering your permanency plan? Or did you feel prepared for adoption in any way?
I can go ahead and start us off with that. Adoption wasn't the first resort in my case. So I am a kinship care adoptee, which means that I was adopted by a family member. So I was adopted by my maternal grandmother, and that conversation didn't come up until after one of our court dates. And it was the last court date to really determine whether or not my siblings and I would be reunified with our birth parents. And after that very long day, and I was 13 years old and having to testify on behalf of myself as well as my siblings, I really wanted to explore what my options were. And I was very active in advocating for myself. I think that that's one of the most powerful things that I found within being in the system was I found my voice, and I knew that there was power in my voice because I was in a position where I could talk to people and people would listen. It was no longer like, oh, she's just talking and like, we're just going to bypass what she's saying. There was people that could actually enact change that was listening to me. And in that, I had a conversation with my CASA worker, and I asked her, I said, what are my options? Do I have to go this route, or is there something else out there for me? And what does that look like? And from there, we engaged in those conversations. And a lot of the proceedings started to change because I was able to speak to the judge. I was able to list my concerns and list what I really wanted and how I wanted to be cared for the extent of the time that I was moving on. So that's when the adoption came on the table for me. I think as professionals, social workers, or anybody else involved in the child welfare system, it is really your job to make sure that you're presenting that stuff to the children. Because a lot of the times the children don't even have access to their Bill of Rights, which is very unfortunate and sad. So it's very important that you're following up on your end to make sure that if somebody else is not engaging in that conversation, or if somebody else is not allowing them to know their options, that you are doing it, because you are a part of a big change and you don't know how that can impact someone's life.
Great. Catherine, did you want to respond?
Yes. So definitely just piggyback off Tawana again. For me, my plan, as soon as I entered care, was reunification. It stayed that way for about 8 years, even though I despised having that plan. That was something that I knew that I didn't want, but I also knew I wanted to, be with my foster family, who I was with for quite some time. And going back to the leadership conference, I was not able to know that adoption was even an option. As a teenager, young adult, like that was not something that was put on the table. It was reunification, and then it went to independent living. And so going into and sitting at the table before knowing of all these different options, I felt very meek and I felt kind of voiceless. Like I would sit there and I really wouldn't participate because, what can I say? I don't know if there's any other options. Those other options are not being put on the table for me. And so after I finally realized what type of rights I had and what may be available to me in my future, that's when I started to, sit at the table and actually share what I wanted to see for myself. Because at the end of the day, everyone else, gets to go home and live their lives and everything. But for me, this is something I have to live out foolproof for the rest of my life. And I get to choose, the cards and how I play them. I may not have been able to choose the cards that were dealt to me, but it was very important for me to play them the way that I foresaw. So for sure.
Thank you. Kate, I'll ask one more from the Q&A. And I think this could be for all three of our panelists. Once a family is identified for a foster youth, how can you help them be receptive to the family and kind of not let the fear of rejection or some of those other kind of strong emotions get in the way? And then specifically to Catherine and Tawana, was there anything that your caseworker did or said that could help you realize to give the family a chance?
I will go for that. I think one of the things that made me feel comfortable with giving, a caseworker a chance was the transparency. Of course, knowing everything that I knew going forward after the conference and continuing to go to conferences and learning more and meeting more people that were, in my place. The transparency soon followed, and just having that outlet where I was able to voice my concerns and they were listened to. It's not just something like, okay, well, this is usually how it goes, because we all understand there's protocols and everything, there's rules and regulations, but not having that one size fit all approach and making me feel that my concerns are worthy and worthy to be listened to, for sure.
Thank you. Kim, did you want to respond to that?
Sure. So how to help the youth be receptive to the family that's been selected for them? First thing I would say is ensuring that the youth was involved in providing information about the type of family they see themselves, adoptive family they see themselves being a part of. Like really hearing from them. Are they wanting a single parent, a two-parent household? Do they want other siblings? Do they want to be the oldest or the youngest? Like really ensuring that you have a good idea of what they want. Interests. Does the family have similar interests as the child, or would at least support their interests? I think that has been helpful. And also, we have a practice where we interview our families. We develop a panel and we have child-specific questions just for that family. And if it's an older youth who is able to participate in us selecting, we're going to ask questions that youth also wants answered, so that once the family is selected, that young person knows that we took everything that they said, that they shared, into consideration in selecting that family. I think that helps a lot in terms of the youth wanting to even meet them. And then of course, to do slow transitions. You kind of let the young person set the pace. If it means just a meeting initially at a place in the community where they can just talk with worker present, if that's what the young person wants, to a visit at their home and so on. So I just, again, having the young person involved as much as possible.
Thanks, Kim. So I think I'm gonna hand it back to Kate for another question.
Okay, so we talk a lot about how to address and engage young people who are resistant. And we know that oftentimes anger or resistance is just a cover up for unaddressed fear. And so I really love this question. And it is, what do you think are fears that some young people may have about choosing adoption? Tawana, would you like to answer this one first?
Yes. So when I just reflect on myself and my own situation, I definitely know that I was scared. I was concerned because of the unknowns and so many uncertainties and such a void of like emptiness of where my future was headed or what permanency and stability would look like for me. So I think that that's a common thing that young people and anyone in care experience, because you have a past of different traumas and different experiences with abandonment and rejection. And it's scary to tap into something that is completely different and something that you really don't have control over. You're trusting the people that are taking over your case and the people that are in your life now to really guide you and lead you to a direction of more understanding, more clarification. So it's something that I think everybody has to be involved in, just continuing to let the youth feel as comfortable as possible. And it's not easy at all. It definitely takes time. I would definitely say in my situation, it is still taking time, honestly, far after even being adopted. That's something that, it's a healing process and something that young people or youth in general are going to have to learn how to, process. And I think what really helped me and benefited me a lot is therapy. I am the biggest advocate on therapy. I absolutely love my therapist. And I think that that is one of the greatest ways to have a support. Once you can connect to youth, whether it's a mentor, a therapist, or social workers, having that one person in their life that's able to just sit down and listen to them, they're able to vent and also able to get advice is very helpful. So that's how I would respond to that.
Thank you, Tawana, and thank you for saying that. It's so important to normalize mental health care. So I really appreciate that comment. Catherine, do you want to answer that question? What fears you think young people might have about adoption?
Of course. So one of the main fears is just not knowing that it is possible to be adopted as a teenager, young adult, so on. Because for me, my immediate thought was, when thinking about adoption, was that, oh, it's only reserved for, babies and little kids and everything, because that is the primary source of, adoption. Never is it really talked about teenagers getting adopted, just more so, okay, them going through the foster care system and then aging out and going through independent living. So that may be something that many teenagers and young adults are not aware of, which does bring into fear, because you fear something that you don't know about in general. So bringing those conversations in ahead of time, especially, when they can acknowledge what's going on, bringing those conversations in and making them feel comfortable about what could be, not what should be, or what is the primary source of what goes on with every teenager aging out. So we can eliminate those fears. And I definitely liked what Tawanda said about mental health, because my therapist that I had throughout my time in foster care definitely helped me, especially through those transitional periods, because your time in foster care, adolescent, teenager, young adult, is a huge transition period, especially going through the idea of adoption and even coping with those ideas that you may want to be adopted and have that permanency within your family that you're staying with. So that's something I would definitely advise, but that was my point.
Thank you. You two certainly drive home our theme this year, that every conversation really does matter. So thank you. Okay, the next question's for Kim. I'm looping you back in. This question is, what was the most surprising thing you learned through your project?
Yeah, I think one of the most surprising things I learned through the interview process and the actual group is the number of youth who were concerned about losing their worker. Again, based on my own experience as a foster care and adoption worker, had no idea that that could be one of their main reasons for saying no. They had fears that if they lost their worker, that perhaps the family would change and not treat them well, that then they would then not have access to supportive services that are available to youth who remained in care, receiving services through the age of 21. And so I think that was one of the most surprising pieces.
That is very surprising, and thank you for sharing that insight. So I think we have time for a final question, and this question is for all three of our panelists, and it's really from Adopt US Kids, the Children's Bureau, and Child Welfare Information Gateway. And we want to know, what are you up to these days, and what would you like to leave the audience with today? Kim, do you want to go ahead and start that?
Sure. What am I up to these days in terms of the youth group?
Yeah, just in general, youth group.
Okay. Well, definitely I'm still supervising my team. We are really focused at our agency on kinship care and growing our kinship care program and services. And in terms of the youth group, I am gearing up to really go out there to talk to my colleagues in Virginia about the youth group happening again virtually, and making sure that our agencies, again, the 133 in Virginia, are aware that this is a group that's available to their young people to refer them to, and that they can attend virtually again, and to really talk about the great outcome, and some other agencies perhaps adopting this as a regular part of practice. And because our agency is small and a lot of other agencies are small too, that we should partner up to do this group on a regular basis.
Awesome, thank you. Catherine, you wanna tell us what you're up to these days and what you wanna leave the audience with today?
Sure. So I am a college graduate. So I do spend my time both in LA and Maryland. I moved to LA right after graduation, doing entertainment. And I'm also here in Maryland working in commercial real estate and investments. And aside from that, I'm really much of a horse girl. So I do equestrian quite often. And I'm also in the process of revamping my blog, which focuses more mental health and lived experiences and just motivation for young adults, especially transitioning from college and going into the real world, what we call adulting. So that's something that's definitely important to me, to kind of raise awareness about those things, especially revolving around mental health. And the main thing that I would like to leave the audience with is just, inspiring your youth to definitely bloom where they're planted. Like I said before, it's not about the cards that's been dealt, but how you play them and who's at your table. And just making sure that you're focusing on like building them up and instilling courage and avocation into them, because the best advocate they're going to look at is you, and even their placement. And so you want to make sure that you are doing your best to kind of be there for them and support them, because courage is nothing without direction, as John F. Kennedy once said.
Love that quote. Thank you so much, Catherine. Tawana, you want to wrap us up here with what you're up to and what you would like to leave the audience with?
Yes, as I mentioned before, I am a freshman here at Seton Hall University, go Pirates, as an Africana Studies major with the hopes of picking up a double major in sociology or political science. I am currently also an active member of New Jersey Youth Council for Former Children in Care, and I'm an active member of that, where I continue to work on my advocacy work. I'm doing a lot of personal and professional development to just build myself and my brand and my network. I'm also very involved in a social justice project right now that is currently happening at my school, and I'm working with different professionals in that area to launch that, and I'm doing work with that. And I would just like to leave you all with a little food for thought. So this quote says, strength doesn't come from what you can do, it comes from overcoming the things you once thought you couldn't. Ricky Rogers, and also a message that your first and last love is yourself. So it's very important to learn to love yourself so you're able to love anybody else that comes in contact with you, anybody else that steps into your presence. That's very important, especially when working with children, to be able to be that for them, because once you exude love, hope, and inspiration, that child is going to take that in, and that's going to be something that they begin to exude as well. And make sure that you're a part of nurturing somebody's positive inner voice. A lot of the times we have fixated and negative narratives that we tend to create for ourselves based on different negative things that either people say to us or that we continue to inflict on ourselves. So it's very important to be cautious of your terminology in any area of your life, and just make sure that you're really nurturing, loving, and being an inspiration for someone. And with that, I thank you all for joining, and I hope that you all learned something from this.
Well, speaking of love, you all are getting a ton of love in the comments, and I just want to let everyone know that we will be downloading and saving these chat transcripts, not only to send to these amazing panelists so they can see all this love, but to be sure that we are responding to each of you individually who would like to be connected to them. So with that, I'm going to hand it back over to Erin to wrap us up.
Thank you. So before we officially close out the webinar, we have one poll question. So if you could please put your responses in the chat. We're looking for what additional information or resources could help you engage and empower youth voices, so that it can help inform future webinars, as well as all of the products that both Adopt US Kids and Child Welfare Information Gateway produce. So we're interested to hear your thoughts. Please put them in the chat. I'll try to read some of them off if I can keep up.
I think people are too busy loving on these ladies.
Yeah, and now it's going too fast. Continued testimony from actual youth that have been in care. I see that one. I saw something about how to recreate the group that Kim talked about. Virtual groups, youth groups. Yeah, it's going way too fast now. Thank you all for you have been such an engaged audience with your questions, your comments, and now your responses to the poll question. I know that we will take more time to kind of thoroughly go through all of them after today's webinar. So please feel free, as I officially kind of wrap things up, to continue to put your thoughts into the chat. Dallin, next slide. Thank you. So we just wanted to say thank you for coming to the National Adoption Month 2021 webinar. As June mentioned in the beginning, please join us for the NAM event, which will be webcast nationally on November 9th at 12 p.m. Please also visit the NAM 2021 website. Again, those links were on the slide kind of towards the beginning of this webinar. And if you would like any more information after today, we have provided our contact information for both Child Welfare Information Gateway and Adopt US Kids. And with that, I will officially close the NAM 2021 webinar. Thank you, everyone. Have a great rest of the day.